This is a remake of a video I just made. I leave a lot of mistakes in videos when I make them and a lot of misspeakings, but I made one in the video I just made that I'm not going to disclose right now, but it was too bad. And later in the video I might get to explain what it was, and you'll understand why I had to delete the video and do it over. But I started off explaining that, talking about Christian teachings outside of the official church. And the official church, when you look into the history of the what's called the canonized Gospels, is sort of when it was solidified into the official church, because before that there were lots of teachings, lots of documents of Christ's life, and a lot of them were considered, decided to be false and were destroyed in many cases. But the 4 Gospels were left that are known as the canonized Gospels. There are other Gospels that still remain uncanonized. But when it was the history of the Catholic Church, or the history of Christianity in English-speaking countries such as Scotland and England and Wales and parts of Ireland, when it was being taught, it was being taught by the Catholic Church that used Latin. They did teachings, documents, and most of the people hearing it did not understand the language it was being spoken in. Therefore, but it was still considered to be doing something for them through the power of the words, even in the language. And some people, even to this day, who do speak English, like it, prefer it in that form. They say it takes the magic out of it to do it otherwise. So, not disputing that, some people wanted to understand what the words were that they were hearing. A man named Patrick Hamilton, who lived in Scotland, was one of these people, and he knew Latin, and he translated the book into English and began teaching it. But because it was being done outside the church, this was considered a crime and a blasphemous activity for a man who wasn't in the clergy to be doing this. So he was put to death, and then later he was dug up, chopped into pieces, and burned, because people so feared that he might be resurrected. Now, that is the story I heard. I can't confirm any of this because it's stuff I've learned, and I'm talking about faith anyhow. So the fact that I believe it, and me saying this is about faith, not about historical fact, is me being honest, me saying that this is what I've heard and what I believe to be the truth. So then what I heard about the King James translation was that King James was wanting to get a divorce, and the Catholic Church wouldn't grant it to him, and they said that his particular divorce wasn't qualified under the teachings that were in the Bible, because his wife had not committed adultery upon him, and he was wanting to put her away anyhow to marry a different wife. The version I heard was because the one wife couldn't have children, and he wanted to have an heir, so he wanted to put this one wife aside and marry this different woman. So he wanted the Bible translated so he could find cause for why this was justified. And in the translation of the King James Bible, there's no justification for a divorce because you want your wife to have babies. So anyhow, the fact that they didn't change the words, put in the clause, makes me trust in the translation, because when people were being ordered by the king to do something, they want to oblige his wishes. So it trusts me that that they had faith. They had more fear of God than they did of King James, and that's brave. And therefore, since I believe that they had that type of faith, I believe that they would have feared to change the words. And a lot of people that have compared the modern teachings to the Dead Sea Scrolls, even though you can only compare, Old Testament stuff in there, they didn't change that either. So, or much. I guess that's arguable, but anyhow, overall, it's been validifying of these translators that have had to translate it out of several languages now, and yet seemingly staying true to it. Okay, so along with having a committee of translators, so it couldn't be, all these people had to agree upon the words they used. Then King James brought in poets. So then once having the translated words, it can be put into the poetic language, that which literature was at a high point in England at this time. And so you have passages like, when the cock crows thrice, you will have betrayed me twice. Or maybe it's, when the cock crows twice, you will have betrayed me thrice. I believe that's the one it is. But anyhow, to put in the rhyme in there, and the word thrice, which means 3 times, is obviously, the rhyme can't have been, would not have been in these previous translations like that. So they came in with the poets after to put it in a valuable form of English. Okay, now I believe in sticking with the King James Bible, whether, because you may not understand a lot of these words. I'm not saying to not read the new international translations, but maybe compare them both. So the least that's going to happen for you is that you learn some of these Old English terms, and that's useful not only for understanding these Old English words, and not also for protecting this King James translation, which is probably the family Bible that your grandparents read. It's also, it's a keyhole, it's a skeleton key to unlocking a lot of older English literature, even though this is considered modern English. But stuff like Shakespeare, your ability to read Shakespeare could be aided by learning the King James Bible, because the words. Now, I consider a lot of modern English to be a devolved form of Old English. They had more words for a lot of things that we speak now, and because it was such a literary culture at the time. And that's important. I'll say something I hadn't included in the other video, is that there's so much of what's considered to be a man, considered to be gruffness, sort of dumbness, quietness, things like that, where at this period in English history, being a man was understanding of great poetry, and being able to use English language in a very comprehensive way, to where you could say what you're wanting to say. And if it involved using bigger words, well, that was fine, because hopefully you were talking to people smart enough to understand them, and if they weren't, you could teach them new words. Anyhow, this is what being a man in this period was about: gaining of knowledge and gaining of ability to communicate the knowledge. And then the way manliness is conveyed lots of times now is in better off to not ask too many questions, not talk much, this type of thing, which isn't going to help mankind. It's not going to help the young men going into this tech world. They're going to need to be able to communicate with women who can communicate very well and are being encouraged for their academic endeavors, and to discourage young men and say that, well, that's unmanly work. Academics is a dangerous thing for the future of the male gender. Okay, but to say it, so that's why I feel that it's important to keep this old translation, because it's actually an improvement upon modern English language to a degree, and that's arguable, because being able to use these catchphrases of inner city catchphrases that can communicate things in 3 words that you might spend a sentence on, and the way you normally communicate, can also be very valuable, because sometimes you need to communicate yourself clearly and well enough to the people that you're speaking to not put yourself on a different mental wavelength to where you can't be understood or be wanted to be heard to begin with. So therefore, I'm not discarding any modern slang either. I'm just saying that this is a valuable translation that's important to not only a faith, but also to the language, the English language, and English literature in general. Now, just go farther with that, how it's not only modern English and worthy of being considered modern English. In some degrees, it's postmodern, because now that we struggle for gender equal terms, and we've forged, we've come up with new pronouns for these things. They already existed in the Bible, in the King James Version, where they use terms like thou, thy, and thine, which are non-gender specific terms, so the reader can know that those words were spoken to them no matter what their gender was. So by the poets that made sure these translations were put in a way that could be most easily communicated and reach the most people with its communication, this foresight of the English language was utilized and is very valuable, and it holds up. So therefore, I say also more reasons why it's important to keep the King James Bible. I say do that in your family Bible form, which is already hopefully been passed down from the same book that's been read by your ancestors, because electronic versions can be changed very easily. I had an experience where I was listening to what was supposed to be the King James Bible. I heard the word victuals, and I knew it was supposed to have been victuals, and I got out the family Bible, and sure enough the word was victuals, but to dumb it down in a way that could be understood by modern English speaking people, they had changed it, and therefore I couldn't trust that electronic version of the King James Bible, because the possibility of them changing a word that changes the meaning of something is not a possibility outside the realm of what I feel could possibly happen. So, and beyond that, when it's God speaking of himself, and this is a little bit of humor I have to include in there, because there is discussion over God's gender, and I can see how a cosmic mind, a broad thinking mind would be like, well, how could God have a gender to begin with? Because what would be the purpose of God having genitalia? Because God is all encompassing, and there would be no third party, there would be no bride, so therefore no husband, and therefore what would be the purpose of God having a gender? But what does, and typically in the biblical form of God, is God the Father. Therefore it's putting the male persona upon him, even though sometimes it uses non-gender specific terms like thou, thy, and thine. But I got to say that that the scientific evidence outside the Bible that suggests that God may have been at least born male, a natural born male, is that he was playing with dinosaurs billions of years ago, and playing with dinosaurs early on suggests the likings, born with the likings of the male gender. But by the Renaissance period, it's gowns and formal balls and stuff like that. So there could have been a feminization of God over time to a degree. But at the same time, he still kept his masculine side, because even during this times you got Vikings raiding villages and stuff like that. So I think it's fair to say that God understands both the male and female aspects of creation, and therefore will function fairly with both. Thank you. Bye. And all of them. Bye.